Outside the window was a fire escape overlooking a sooty courtyard, and across it lived two middle-aged lesbians who sometimes neglected to draw the blinds. Charlie had that defensive contempt for homosexuals, which people often have when their own sexuality is an embarrassment to them. He was horny all the time, but he was terribly afraid of being vulgar. His Harvard education had been designed to extinguish all the vulgarity glowing deep down in his genes. And though he wanted to get laid, he did not want to manage it in a way that would make him appear crude, either to himself or to the girls he tried to seduce. I've noticed anyway that unless a man is a bona fide genius, a Harvard education is a permanent liability. Not so much what they learn there, but what they presume about themselves ever after, the albatross of being a Harvard man, the aura, the atmosphere, the pronunciation problems, the tender memories of the River Charles. It tends to infantilize them, and cause them to go dashing about the corridors of advertising agencies with their ties flapping behind them. It causes them to endure the dreadful food and ratty upholstery of the Harvard Club for the sake of impressing some sweet young thing with the glorious source of their B.A. Charlie had this Harvard impediment. He had graduated with a straight C- average, and yet he always felt incredibly superior to me with my Phi Beta Kappa from grubby déclassé Barnard. He felt that at Harvard he had been touched with the brush of refinement, that despite all his failures in the world, he was still, a Gilbert and Sullivan chorus should sing out this phrase, a Harvard man. Stop this nonsense of running from one man to the next, stand on my own 2 feet for once. Why was that so terrifying? The other options were worse, weren't they? A lifetime of Freudian interpretations or a lifetime of Langian interpretations? What a choice! I might as well join forces with a religious fanatic, a Scientology freak, or a doctrinaire Marxist. Any system was a straitjacket, if you insisted on adhering to it so totally and humorlessly. I didn't believe in systems. Everything human was imperfect and ultimately absurd. What did I believe in, then? In humor, in laughing at systems, at people, at oneself, in laughing even at one's own need to laugh all the time, in seeing life as contradictory, many-sided, various, funny, tragic, and with moments of outrageous beauty, in seeing life as a fruitcake, including delicious plums and bad peanuts, but meant to be devoured hungrily all the same, because you couldn't feast on the plums without also sometimes being poisoned by the peanuts. He's alive. Joan of Arc burned at the stake, French Protestants broken on the wheel, resistance fighters having their eyes plucked out, Nazis torturing Jews with electric shocks, with needles, with unanesthetized operations, Southerners lynching blacks, American soldiers cutting the ears of Vietnamese, Indians being tortured, Indians torturing, the whole history of the human race running with blood and gore and the screams of victims. I press my eyes closed, but the scenes replay themselves on the inside of my burning lids. I feel as if I have been flayed alive, as if all my inner organs are open to the elements, as if the top of my head is blown off and even my brain is exposed. Every nerve ending transmits only pain. Pain is the only reality. It isn't true, I say. Remember the days when you felt pleasure, when you were glad to be alive, when you felt joy so great you thought you'd burst with it? But I can't remember. I am nailed to the cross of my imagination, and my imagination is as horrible as the history of the world. I remember my first trip to Europe at the age of 13. We spent 6 weeks in London visiting our English relatives, seeing the sights, accumulating huge bills at Claridge's, which my father said were paid by Uncle Sam. What a rich uncle. But I spent the trip being terrified by all the torture devices we saw in the Tower of London, and all the wax horrors we saw at Madame Tussaud's. I had never seen thumbscrews and racks before. I had never realized. Do people still use those things? I asked my mother. No, darling, they only used them in the olden days when people were more barbaric. Civilization has progressed since then. It was civilized, 1955, only a decade or so since the Nazi Holocaust. It was the era of atomic testing and stockpiling. It was 2 years after the Korean War, and only shortly after the height of the communist witch hunts, with blacklists containing the names of many of my parents' friends. But my mother, smoothing the real linen sheets, between which I trembled, insisted that rainy night in London on civilization. She was trying to spare me. If the truth was too hard to bear, then she would lie to me. Good, I said, closing my eyes. And Uncle Sam, who made so many things tax-deductible, had just 2 years ago electrocuted the Rosenbergs in the name of civilization. Was 2 years ago the olden days? My mother and I conspired to pretend it was, as we hugged each other before turning out the light. But where was my mother now? She hadn't saved me then, and she couldn't save me now. But if only she'd appear, I'd surely be able to get through the night. Night by night, we get by. If only I could be like Scarlett O'Hara, and think about it all tomorrow.